I'm the Vice President of Technical Sales at Checkpoint Technologies. I will be your moderator this afternoon for the webinar. On the phone here with us is Patrick McCartney, who's the Solution Architect Manager. Patrick will be doing the presentation and talking about upgrading to Performance Center 11.50. We also have a special guest on the call with us today on this webinar, Gurmeen Aneja. She is the HP Product Manager for Performance Center Product Suite, and Gurmeen will be here answering questions and answers on Performance Center in general, and also as well as the new release of LoadRunner and Performance Center 11.52. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide, and I'll do a quick introduction of Checkpoint Technologies, and then we'll get going with the webinar. So just a quick, brief overview of Checkpoint Technologies. We were incorporated in January 2003 as Mercury's partner. We have been active with Mercury Product Suite for over 10 years. Our headquarters is based out of Tampa, Florida, but we also have satellite offices all over the United States, including in Charlotte, in North Carolina, in Minnesota, and California. We are considered HP's software specialists when it comes to applications, which includes products such as Performance Center, Application Lifecycle Management, LoadRunner, UFT, Unified Functional Testing Product Suite. And we also provide first-tier technical support. So if you have a maintenance contract coming up for technical support, we can certainly help you with that. We also provide training. We're HP's authorized training partner, which allows us to use their courseware and provide official authorized training through HP directly. We are considered experts in the IT Performance Suite portfolio, which includes Application Lifecycle Management, and also on Application Performance Management. Next slide. Just a quick overview of the services that we provide. We provide staff augmentation. So if you have any long-term services need where you need manual testing or performance testing or functional testing, we can certainly provide resources. We have currently active contracts going with several customers where we're providing teams of resources, including manual testers. We're also experts in the consulting area. So if you have any needs for assessment as it relates to Performance Center or ALM, or any requirements or needs for installation or configuration, we can certainly help you with that as well. Checkpoint also has a outsourcing facility, which we provide out of our Tampa office. It's a U.S.-based facility where we can provide functional and performance testing services. Last but not least, we can also provide, as I mentioned earlier, training around HP products. It could be an on-site, virtual, or public training. It could be structured in a classroom with up to 15 to 20 students in a classroom. Or, alternatively, we can provide mentoring. So if you have 1 to 2 students or folks that want to focus on specific topics around products with Performance Center or ALM, we can customize our training to and gear it towards specific needs. It's a more cost-effective method. So for all this, feel free to reach out to us. We will have our contact information after when this presentation ends. We'll be happy to help you with that. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Patrick McCartney, who's going to be talking about upgrading to HP Performance Center 11.50. Patrick?
All right, thanks, Roz. Hello, everyone. So we're going to be talking today about upgrading to Performance Center. And what we're going to be covering is kind of a mix of upgrading to Performance Center if you're currently using LoadRunner today, or upgrading to the newest version of Performance Center, which is 11.5, if you're currently using an older version of Performance Center. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about what Performance Center is for those of you that don't have any experience with this tool. So Performance Center is really an enterprise performance testing application. It's an entire suite that will allow you to do performance testing and validation of your applications. Now, the one thing about Performance Center that is really powerful is that it supports geographically diverse applications and users. So this is a good fit for organizations that might have multiple offices, and you want to be able to purchase one suite of software to do your performance testing, but have people potentially all over the world creating and executing tests on applications that may be hosted all over the world or in different data centers, within the U.S. even. Now, it provides a lot of advanced monitoring and diagnostics. So you get the same tools that you get with LoadRunner, but the integration here is a lot tighter, and we're going to take a look at a little bit of that later. It's also really good for organizations that are busy doing performance testing. So if you have many performance testing projects that are running concurrently, or large projects where you may have many testers, Performance Center is a very good fit because the way that it's set up, it's going to allow many people to be working at the same time and all contributing to the same project. Overall, though, it's a central repository. So it's going to be storing all of your assets for performance testing, so you include your scripts, any of the performance tests you create, monitoring information. It stores all your test results. It allows you to store requirements, defects, and a whole host of other entities that you can create and store within Performance Center. So really, it's kind of this overarching umbrella that includes all these different assets and allows you to manage them from a central location. So Performance Center is built on HP's Application Lifecycle Management Platform. So when we talk about ALM, we're also including Performance Center in there. So ALM is kind of the core of Performance Center. So in ALM, we have release management, so we can manage releases of different products. We also have requirements management. So requirements management, this can include performance requirements, can also include functional requirements. When we're talking about Performance Center specifically, the requirements management allows us to manage performance requirements. It also includes test management. So this is where we start managing our performance tests. In the greater ALM space, we're also managing functional testing or manual tests. We can also be managing defects out of this. So because it's built on ALM, we also have native defect management through Performance Center. We also get lab management. So this is an important piece of being able to manage the different pieces of infrastructure that we use when we're executing performance tests. So these are things like our load generators or controllers that are either running the tests or creating the load for us. ALM provides an interface that allows us to schedule these tests and to manage the different pieces of hardware, perform upgrades on them if we need to. So all of that is included with ALM and comes with Performance Center. The development management also is included in ALM. So this is going to tie defects and requirements into ALM and tie the source code changes and builds into ALM. So all of this is part of the bigger ALM space. We also, at the base of all this, have a very, very powerful reporting platform. So any of the entities that we're creating within ALM or Performance Center can be reported on. So there's a number of different reporting mechanisms, but the reporting is going to allow us to pull all the data out and really slice it and dice it any way we like. So the Performance Center suite is built on LoadRunner technology. So LoadRunner technology has been around for a number of years, and really at this point it's a very proven technology, kind of considered the industry standard. So we start out with LoadRunner. And with LoadRunner, we've had HP SiteScope. So SiteScope is a enterprise monitoring system that allows us to do agentless monitoring of different architectures. So this might be a Windows server, might be a Linux server, maybe it's a SQL database or an Oracle database, an SAP application, Oracle application, whatever it might be. SiteScope is going to allow us to monitor that. That information can be fed into LoadRunner, and as we're going to see, this is also part of Performance Center. Diagnostics is another application that traditionally has been used with LoadRunner, but is also used with Performance Center. So diagnostics is going to allow us to connect into like an application like a .NET app or a J2EE application, and it's going to allow us to do a more in-depth trace of the execution of the application so we can pinpoint bottlenecks. So if we have a long-running SQL query or if we have classes that are executing and taking a long time, diagnostics is going to help us pinpoint where that performance bottleneck is. So encapsulating all of it is Performance Center. So Performance Center includes all of these different technologies. The main difference, though, is the integration is a lot tighter, and we're going to see a couple of more of the differences here in the next couple of slides. So LoadRunner versus Performance Center. So what are the differences between these two tools? So with LoadRunner, all of our view-user licenses have to be assigned to a controller. So let's say that I owned 1,000 virtual user licenses, let's say just of the web licensing, and I have 2 controllers. So if I wanted to use those licenses, I need to assign those different view-user licenses to a particular controller. So in most cases, you'd probably say, well, 500 go to one controller and 500 go to another. The problem is that if you wanted to try to run a test that used, say, 600 or 800 virtual users, you wouldn't be able to do it because only that one controller could take up to the 500 users. On the flip side, Performance Center, all the controllers can use all the virtual user licenses. So if I have 2 controllers and I have 1,000 virtual user licenses, one controller can consume all of your licenses at one time. So this makes it a lot more flexible as far as how you have your licensing set up and how you share your licenses across departments. So now you no longer have to talk about each department having their own controller and their own vUser licensing. You can share controllers and you can share that vUser licensing across the board. In LoadRunner, for the most part, the tests are run on demand. There is a little bit of scheduling there, but it's not extremely powerful. The big difference with Performance Center is these tests can be scheduled out. So there's a very, very robust scheduling component to Performance Center that allows us to schedule out our tests and run them without any user intervention. So if we wanted to run a test at, say, midnight, we could run that. If we want to run a test every day for the next week for 3 hours, we could do that. And when we set up that scheduling, it also reserves our hardware and manages it for us. And this is one of the things about LoadRunner that is somewhat difficult sometimes, especially when you have multiple controllers that you're trying to manage. So all of the generators and controllers have to be shared, and the sharing is all manual. So let's say that I'm sharing a controller with one other department or maybe even other team members, and we're all working on different projects. Keeping track of who's using the controller when is a very manual process. So if I'm running a test and someone else says, hey, I need to run this test now, they're not able to do it. And there's really not any visibility to that scheduling. So typically you have to do the scheduling outside of LoadRunner. You'd be doing that in like a shared calendar or something like that. But the hardware could still be used. So if you say, hey, I need to use this generator at this time, and someone else goes in and uses it, there's nothing to keep them from using that generator. So when you start having bigger teams with more complex applications, this becomes a little bit more troublesome. In Performance Center, this scheduling mechanism automatically allocates all these different pieces of hardware, and it allows you to share them across your projects. So the controllers and generators are reserved for those different time slots so that nobody else can use them. So from a scheduling perspective, this makes it a lot easier to go in and figure out who's using which hardware when, and it also gives you some reports on your utilization of hardware and licensing. So you can see how many controllers are we using normally. So if I've got 2 controllers, I can see if it makes sense to upgrade to that 3rd one. Or how many generators am I typically using? Do I need more generators? All that reporting is available within Performance Center. With LoadRunner, one of the main differences is that the users have to be co-located with the controller. So the applications can really live anywhere, but the users have to be in the same location as where the controller is installed. So let's say that I had a controller installed in Charlotte, and I was physically in Charlotte. I could run that test, and even if the application was, say, hosted in Phoenix, that would still work. But if I was in Phoenix and my controller was hosted in Charlotte, then that's not something that you're able to do with LoadRunner. So that's one of the main differences between Performance Center and LoadRunner, is that with Performance Center, the users can initiate the test from anywhere. So I could be in Charlotte, I could be in Phoenix, I could be in Shanghai. It doesn't matter where I am, I can execute a test on any controller and any hardware that's tied to the Performance Center system. So it's truly a global system that allows us to run tests from anywhere. With LoadRunner, the monitoring is all manual. So that you have to be manually configuring these monitors, and you deploy them for every test that you're going to create. So if I create a new scenario and I want to deploy monitoring for that, there's an amount of configuration for that. Even if you're using SiteScope, you can deploy the monitors in SiteScope, but then you're still tying them back into that particular scenario. So the monitoring configuration tends to be a little bit more manual than what it would be in Performance Center. With Performance Center, we can store these monitoring configurations and reuse them over and over. So if I have a configuration for, say, an SAP application, every time I run my SAP tests, I can just pull that monitoring configuration in and reuse it. So what we're trying to do with Performance Center is create something once and reuse it over and over and over again. So this is what we see that a lot with the monitoring configurations. With LoadRunner, the way that it's set up is that the scenario is really the brains of the operation with the controller. Only one user at a time can create those scenarios. So, and that's per controller. So if I only own one controller license, I can only have one person be creating scenarios. So that's including tying in the monitoring, creating the monitoring, setting up the load profile. So all those activities are done within the controller, and it's really a single-threaded operation. So if I have multiple team members, only one person can do that at a time. With Performance Center, any number of people can be creating those performance tests. So that's including creating the monitoring, pulling in the various scripts that need to run. So all of that is done through Performance Center. The only limitation here is that you can only run as many concurrent tests as you have controller licenses, which makes sense. But it's going to allow as many people as we need to go in and create those tests and be modifying those tests. So really it gives us a lot more flexibility around creating larger performance projects. With LoadRunner, we have limited ability to control the various permissions. So you can be storing scripts within Quality Center or ALM, or in most cases, people are storing the scripts on a local file system. But there's not a lot of permissions around who can execute tests, who can modify which scripts. A lot of that is basically just kind of handled internally. So it works well for smaller teams, but when you start getting into bigger teams with bigger projects, that can become kind of challenging. With Performance Center, it's got a fully configurable permissions scheme. So I can create user groups that have permissions to, say, execute tests. I've got user groups that can set up monitoring. So any activity within Performance Center can be configured to have permissions associated to it. So for larger organizations, multiple teams, this makes a lot more sense. With LoadRunner, one of the biggest challenges that we have is creating tests that emulate real-world uses of our application. So if I'm trying to create a load on an application that's already out in production, a lot of times we're kind of looking at different statistics, trying to figure out who's using which processes the most, and sometimes it's a little bit subjective. And what you're trying to do is come up with the best possible scenario you can, but there's sometimes choices that you make that aren't necessarily what they should be. So if you're trying to go out and say, I need to pick all the processes that are most important, you may not realize that there is a process out there that's being run many, many times. You've also got this process of creating your own data. Sometimes that includes loading production data, but all of that is a pretty much manual process. With Performance Center, there's the ability to use production monitoring data to really go in and create very, very realistic all of this can be pulled from your production monitoring systems and pulled into Performance Center and used to create performance tests that are very, very realistic and will help you test your systems in a more accurate way. So let's talk a little bit about the licensing of Performance Center. So each controller is purchased individually. Now, when you purchase a controller, this controller includes an unlimited amount of monitoring. So you get the SiteScope monitoring, and you get the traditional LoadRunner monitoring as well. You also get unlimited use of the virtual user generator. So this is the tool that allows you to create those performance scripts. It's the same exact tool that you're using in LoadRunner. You just, instead of saving it to a local file system, you're saving it within Performance Center. Same tool. When you buy a controller, the Performance Center and server and any of the components, that includes the ALM components, are packaged with the controller. So you don't have to go out and purchase additional software for that. Basically, once you purchase that first controller, you get the Performance Center server and all the components that go with it. So there's really just a single purchase there. You also purchase virtual user bundles. So you can purchase any quantity, and those are just added into the installation. And as we said before, those virtual users are not tied to a specific controller. So if I have two controllers, any one of those controllers could use any amount of my virtual user licensing. So once it's in the system, it's kind of up for grabs for any of those controllers to use. With Performance Center, we also have the ability to use term licensing. So this is licensing that can be like a year long, or you can buy perpetual. We can also use virtual user days. So virtual user days is a way of creating virtual users that are only good for a 24-hour period. So when you purchase them, as soon as you activate and start using them, they're good for 24 hours. This is very useful for projects where you have to ramp up and test something for a short amount of time. So let's say that you kind of have a one-off test. Using virtual user days is going to allow you to go out and procure the licensing for that particular protocol for the application, but not necessarily buy it perpetually. So if it's an application that you don't anticipate needing to test over and over and over again, sometimes virtual user days can be a better value. So Performance Center supports virtual user days natively. So there's a couple different deployment options that we can use when we deploy Performance Center. So the two that we have are a standalone installation or a merged installation. So the standalone installation is going to require the same, basically the same hardware configuration, the same systems, but the licensing is a little bit different. When we use a merged installation, this is actually going to merge your Performance Center installation with an existing ALM installation. So while they both require an ALM server, the licensing is a little bit different. So what we're going to see is that in the standalone installation, there's fewer licensing restrictions, but it also is going to give you a little bit less functionality. Now, one of the prereqs for Performance Center is to have an ALM server installed. So when you purchase Performance Center, you actually get a license to use an ALM server. Now, it's not going to include all of the functionality that comes with ALM, so it's not going to allow you to manage manual tests or functional tests, but you do still have to have that infrastructure. Now, if you have a standalone installation of Performance Center and you also have an installation of ALM or Quality Center, then you might be managing multiple infrastructures. So that's a lot more patching, stuff like that. So if you have a merged installation, you're able to mix your Performance Center and ALM artifacts. So basically you have one ALM system that manages all your performance tests and your functional tests. This is a lot more efficient. You can basically create a project where you can see everything cradle to grave in that project. So all of your performance requirements, all of your functional requirements, and even if it's more of an agile setup, if you've got user stories, tasks, all of those can be mixed into your performance project. With a merged installation, you've got a single ALM infrastructure. So this is then one database infrastructure, one repository structure. So it makes it a lot easier to manage. Then you've only got one system to patch. If you have a standalone Performance Center system and then you also have another ALM system out there, then you're managing two different patch cycles, and that just adds a lot more complexity to the system. Now, if you go with a merged installation, it does require you to have ALM licensing. So if you have Quality Center today, you would have to upgrade to ALM in order to be able to merge the two installations together. So there's a couple different things that go into this, and we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the different impacts that the deployment has on the licensing. So we've got our two different licensing models, the standalone and the merged. With the standalone, for every controller license that you purchase, you get what's known as a PC lifecycle user. So this is a login that's going to allow you to go in and manage defects and requirements within Performance Center. So when you install Performance Center standalone, you get the ability to manage defects and requirements. You also get unlimited test plan and test lab licensing. So this is the licensing that allows you to go in and create performance tests create your monitoring profiles. This is all through ALM. Now, you can also go out and purchase additional PC lifecycle users. So if you have a standalone installation and you want to have more people be able to manage defects and requirements, you can purchase additional licenses for that functionality. Now, when we go into a merged installation, you no longer get one of those free PC lifecycle user licenses for every controller license. So at this point, you're basically using all of your licenses from your existing ALM pool. So if I have a pool of ALM licenses, let's say I have 10 full licenses, if I have someone that logs into Performance Center and goes into the ALM portion of it, they're then consuming one of those ALM licenses. And from that point on, you no longer have the unlimited test plan, test lab licensing. So if I go into ALM, any person that goes in is going to consume a test just like anyone who is going into traditional ALM. Now, one feature that you do get with Performance Center is the My Performance Center portal, which is a web-based portal which can help you reduce some of that license burden on your ALM system. So just because you go to a merged installation doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to go out and purchase more licensing. You just have to be aware that the licenses are going to have a standalone performance system. Let's talk about moving up to Performance Center. So your existing generators can be imported into Performance Center. So if you've got a library of scripts that you've written with LoadRunner, you can import those into Performance Center. It's very easy. Now, one of the more time-consuming pieces is rebuilding your performance tests. So the scenarios will actually need to be rebuilt into performance tests in Performance Center. So there's not necessarily a one-to-one upgrade there. They're the equivalent as far as what they do, but you have to rebuild those performance tests. If you have existing site scope or diagnostic installations, those can be integrated into Performance Center as well. So as long as they're the right version, we can integrate those with no problem. The same actually goes for your LoadRunner generators. So if you have load generators, as long as they're at the current version, we can leverage those in Performance Center. So you don't necessarily have to go out and buy more hardware for load generators. We can just use those existing generators. A lot of times we can do it without uninstalling and reinstalling a new version of the generator. It just kind of depends what version you're running on right now. But you can leverage a lot of the same hardware that you already have and use that for Performance Center. Now, what if you have Performance Center already? So Performance Center has been around for a number of years, and we do have a lot of customers that are currently on Performance Center. So Performance Center versions 8, 9, and 11 can be upgraded to 11.5. This is basically a direct upgrade. Depending which version you're on, there's a couple more steps involved, but you can upgrade directly. You don't necessarily have to go through and do a staged upgrade. Like if you're familiar with upgrading Quality Center, a lot of times you have to do staged upgrades when you have old versions. With this, we're able to do direct upgrades to version 11.5. But like I said, there are a few caveats in there with different processes that have to be run through depending on how old the system is. Now, all of your existing projects, scripts, results, data, that's all preserved when we move up to 11.5. So you don't have to worry about recreating anything. It's going to go in and move all of your data. So it's going to look a little bit different. So if you come from versions 8.x or 9.x, it's definitely a large change because the architecture of Performance Center changed drastically when version 11 came out. But all of your data will be preserved. So just keep that in mind. If you choose to upgrade, you don't have to redo your scripts. You don't have to rearrange your projects. All of your data will be there. Now, if you have an existing Performance Center installation, you can do this upgrade in place, but we really recommend using new hardware. And that's new hardware for the Performance Center server, especially, and for the ALM server. Because with the new version, it supports obviously newer versions of Windows and newer database versions, and it makes it a little bit cleaner. Sometimes the uninstall of Performance Center can be a little bit messy, so using new hardware is the best. Now, when we're talking about deploying one of these systems, we can use virtual hardware. So most of our customers now are using virtualized systems for say, the Performance Center server, the ALM server, even maybe the controllers. We get into the generators. Most people still use physical generators because they provide much better throughput and horsepower. So just keep in mind that while you probably want to use new hardware, you don't necessarily have to go out and purchase new hardware. Like I said before, we could probably leverage your existing load generators, but the other hardware for the Performance Center server, having it be new helps us a lot. So when we're doing these upgrades, it's vital that we plan these because Performance Center upgrades are a little bit complicated. So when you're doing upgrades, you want to make sure you plan everything out to minimize the downtime because it can take a while to do these upgrades, and if you don't do them correctly, you can be left without a working system. So doing proper planning is vital when you're doing a Performance Center upgrade. So let's take a quick look at the support dates for Performance Center, when support is going to end for these various products. So if you currently have a Performance Center installation today, when does support run out for it? So bad news, if you're on PC 8.x, you're already out of support. So what this means is that if you have any problems with the system and you attempt to contact HP, they're going to say you need to upgrade because they're not releasing any more patches for it. You know, what's out there is what's out there. So if you're currently on Performance Center 8.x, I would strongly urge you to upgrade this as quickly as you can because if you plan on using this, you know, if you have any problems with it, you're not going to have support. Beyond that, when you upgrade to the newest version, you get new protocol bundles that allow you to do testing of newer applications. So things like wireless applications, you know, newer versions of ERP, CRM systems, things like that. So if you're on Performance Center 9.x, so any of the 9 versions, support for this is going to end at the end of this year. So after the 31st of this year, you'll be kind of out in the cold as well. So you need to make sure that if you have a version of Performance Center that is 9.x, you're going to want to make sure you upgrade that before December. So getting going on the planning stages now would probably be a good idea. Now, if you're on one of the newer versions of Performance Center, so let's say versions 11, this is going to be supported until 2015. So you've got a couple years here. So if you're on version 11, it's not necessarily crucial that you go and upgrade to 11.5, but when you go to 11.5, you will be able to get some of the newer features. So you're getting things like enhanced virtual user licensing bundles, some of the new lab management features. So it does give you just, you know, the general different features you're going to get when you upgrade. Now, if you're on version 11, once you move to version 11.5, support for this will end in 2016. So you're going to be good for a number of years if you upgrade right now. So just as kind of a roadmap, if you're on versions 8 or 9, you need to get upgraded as soon as possible so that you're not out of support. Versions 11, you could probably wait. But again, this is when you're on version 11, the main thing you're getting is additional features. So how can Checkpoint Technologies help during this? So we're experts in doing upgrades and implementations. We've been doing this for a long time, so we have many years of experience doing Performance Center implementations and doing upgrades. Like I was mentioning before, these upgrades can be a little bit complicated, and the implementations can be a little bit complicated with planning out what you need, properly sizing them. So bringing in expert help is really something that we do recommend because we've seen customers that have tried to do it themselves and got halfway through and then realized they didn't really know what they were doing or had questions, and then we kind of had to start fresh again. So, you know, doing it right the first time is definitely the best way. And as Faraz mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of our specialties is training and mentoring. So whenever you do a new implementation of Performance Center, whether it's you're upgrading from an existing version or you're going from LoadRunner to Performance Center or you're buying Performance Center new for the first time, getting proper training and mentoring is really going to help you get the most out of your software. So you're making a large investment and you're doing this because you want your applications to be solid, but if you don't have the proper training and mentoring, then sometimes you're kind of left out in the cold and left to figure it out yourself. So we have experts on staff that can help you with that. And if you feel that you want any of our help, just please reach out and contact us. Okay, with that, we do have an upcoming webinar that I want to talk about just for a second. So Faraz and Gurmeen are actually going to be hosting a more in-depth Performance Center 11.5 webinar on June 5th. So this is going to go through a number of different topics, but really focus on how we can leverage the production monitoring in Performance Center and some of the new features of the lab management module in Performance Center 11.5. So it's going to be a more deep dive into the individual features that are new in Performance Center 11.5. So this is the performance application lifecycle that you might have heard about, and also how you can leverage a lot of these existing technologies in the new Performance Center. So if you're interested in that webinar, just go over to checkpointtech.com, and there's a link right on the front page to register for that webinar. And again, it's on June 5th, so it's right before this year's Discover. So with that, we're going to open it up for questions. So Faraz, questions?
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks. So I've got a first question here for Patrick, and I'm going to distribute the questions between Gurmeen and Patrick, both of you. The first question is, will LoadRunner 11.5 and Performance Center 11.5 work with ALM 11 Enterprise Edition?
So you can store LoadRunner 11.5 scripts and scenarios within Quality Center 11. Now, if you want to move to Performance Center, if you purchased Performance Center, you'd have to go and install a standalone system unless you upgraded your licensing of Quality Center to ALM, in which case then we could merge the two installations together. So if LoadRunner is compatible with Performance Center, we'd need to upgrade your licensing. It's not necessarily that it's not compatible version-wise, it's just the licensing would need to be upgraded.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. The next question is licensing question. So Gurmeen, I'm going to pass it on to you. The question is, does SiteScope come with Performance Center licenses, or do we need to pay extra for SiteScope licenses to work with Performance Center?
Okay, so for Performance Center and for LoadRunner, actually, you get a series of free licenses. So the initial request is for 500 points. So it comes with a Performance Center installation or a LoadRunner installation, and you have the option to request additional licenses in case you need them for SiteScope specifically. And this needs to be used in conjunction with PC or LoadRunner in a pre-production environment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gurmeen. The next question comes from a familiar name for me. The question is, we have ALM 11.51. Do you have Performance Center 11.51 version, or do we need to upgrade to ALM Performance Center extension of 11.51?
I'll take that one, I guess. So actually, there is now, if you have ALM 11.51, you can use Performance Center with that. There's actually, just as of late last night, the new versions of ALM and Performance Center just came out. So that's 11.52. So it's just a patch version. So what I would suggest doing is, if you were moving to Performance Center and you wanted to have a merged installation, install the 11.52 patch, and then also use Performance Center 11.52.
Yeah, and I can just add to that a little bit. Even if you are using just a standalone version of Performance Center, the ALM platform itself would need to be upgraded. So you would want to have the ALM platform upgraded to 11.52, and then the Performance Center server to 11.52 with the related components, which is your controllers and your generators.
Okay. So Gurmeen, the follow-up question on that. The question is, please explain the difference between Performance Center 11.50, 5.1, and 5.2. Are those patches, or are those full software installations?
Okay, good question. So 11.5 is a new installation. It would require an uninstall and a reinstall of if you're upgrading from 11 or if you're upgrading from any of the previous versions of Performance Center. 11.5.1 and 5.2 are patches. So, for example, 11.5.2 is a service pack. 11.5.1 was released as a private patch for many reasons, but it is also a service pack. So both of those can be rolled on top of the 11.5 base installation.
Okay, great. The next question kind of goes in the same line of questioning here. The question is, we have ALM 11.0 in production. Do we upgrade ALM if we are planning to upgrade to Performance Center 11.5? Gurmeet, I'll let you answer that.
Sure. So I guess we would need a little bit more clarity on the question. If your ALM instance is integrated with Performance Center and you want to go to the 5.2 version, then all of the entire installation would have to be upgraded to 11.5.2. But if you're using separate instances, if you're using a separate instance for ALM and a separate instance or a standalone instance of Performance Center, you can have those on separate versions. But if they are on an integrated environment, if you're using Performance Center through the ALM mechanism and you are working on a full-blown ALM license, then both instances have to be on the same version.
Okay, great. So folks, please feel free to submit more questions. You can see a questions tab on the right-hand side of the screen. You can click on the plus sign. It will expand your tab, and you can submit questions through that. In the meantime, Gurmeet, I'm going to ask you a question here while we wait for some more. Can you talk about the Performance Center and LoadRunner 11.5.2? What are the new features, and what are the differences and enhancements that have been made to the newer version, which was released yesterday?
Sure. So a lot of the features and enhancements that are coming out in 11.5.2 are specific to our protocol enhancements with LoadRunner or VUGen specifically. So there's a lot of enhancements that have been made, for example, on the mobile side of things. We are providing a new proxy recorder that allows you to do recording on, say, some client machines or even Mac operating systems without having a VUGen installation on it. And we also have, for example, an Android recorder that you could put on your phone, do the recording on the phone and then email yourself a file that is going to be realized as a VUGen script. So a lot of enhancements around that area. There's also, if anybody remembers from the very long ago days of LoadRunner, we used to have a utility called the Virtual Table Server. So this has been built upon, and it has a revived focus on it. We built a web-based add-on for the VTS. It's installed on a standalone server. It allows you to use this dynamic parameterization, which is very unique to the LoadRunner product, and allows you to do all sorts of assignments of parameters from script to script when a load test is running. So a lot of enhancements in that area as well. There's some enhancements in terms of supporting the Google Chrome for the web HTTP HTML recording. There's also a lot of work done with regards to the Shunra network virtualization solution in terms of how we do assignments of groups and load generators, analysis as far as network virtualization graphs are concerned, etc. And in addition to that, with Performance Center, so Performance Center is obviously absorbing a lot of these changes, but some enhancements that are specific to Performance Center are around Performance Application Lifecycle, which is the capability that we have of importing production data into Performance Center, doing a comparison of what you're actually testing to what actually the users are experiencing, and sort of tuning your scenarios to be more realistic and more robust. So there's some enhancements in that area which allow you to now do tuning while the test is running, so you can see a change. If you change the scenario as per production statistics, you can see that be realized immediately on your screen. There's some enhancements as far as the licensing is concerned. So that's the majority of the changes that are being introduced in 5.2.
Okay, great. I mean, I'm very excited about the virtual table server because that's a pretty powerful tool, especially if you're doing testing with SAP or Oracle E-Business Suite. It makes life a lot more easier in managing data.
Very not utilized enough, but it's not been very mainstream, and we hope to change it with this release.
Absolutely. So I've got several additional questions here. This one will go to Patrick. So how many servers are needed for standalone installation of Performance Center?
Okay. So you need an ALM server, and you need a Performance Center server. So the ALM server can be installed on Windows, Solaris, or Linux. The Performance Center server needs to be Windows. Now, with ALM, you're going to need a file repository. So the file repository is basically just a storage system. So this can be a NAS or a SAN location that you're storing files on. You also need a database server. So the database would need to be Oracle or SQL Server. So ALM is going to require basically 3 components, and then you have the Performance Center server. Now, all of those could be virtualized. Now, when you're using Performance Center, HP does recommend that you actually use high availability with that. So what that means is you'd have multiple ALM servers, so say 2 ALM servers, and then you could have multiple Performance Center servers. For a small installation, you don't necessarily need that, but the minimum would be having those 4 components there. Now, once you have the Performance Center server, you do need the controllers and generators. So these are typically just known as PC hosts. So you install sort of a generic software onto them, and then you can configure them to be either the controllers or the generators or a data processor, which is another component of Performance Center. So you're typically going to need at least 1 controller and 1 generator. So those could be virtual, those could be physical. So you're probably looking at 2 additional servers for that as well. If you're looking at using SiteScope, you would need to deploy SiteScope on a separate machine, so that would require a separate server as well.
Okay, great, thanks. Now, going back to the licenses, and I'll pass this question to Gurmeen. So, again, Gurmeen, the question is about SiteScope. So, regarding free license for SiteScope, we get 500 points. Does that remain free as long as Performance Center or LoadRunner is valid, or is it free for a limited time?
So it's free till you have the LoadRunner and Performance Center installations as well, because it's supposed to be used in conjunction with those products in a pre-production environment.
Okay. And then the next question kind of follows the similar line here. Is HP Diagnostics license included in Performance Center, or is it separate?
So HP Diagnostics is a separate purchase. It is a standalone application that works on its own, and it can be used in conjunction with LoadRunner and Performance Center. But the integration is at no cost, but in order to run diagnostics on its own to capture your application statistics, there is a license that's required and a purchase.
Okay, great. The next question, again, I will pass it on to Gurmeen. So it says, the question is, Performance Center also has a controller. What is the difference between a controller in LoadRunner versus controller in Performance Center?
So the core technology of Performance Center is, of course, LoadRunner. So we do leverage controllers in Performance Center as well. The only difference is that it allows you to be in a more web-based environment. So you have access to multiple controllers. So it allows you to run multiple tests or multiple concurrent load tests at the same time, given that you have multiple controllers installed. And when you're creating a scenario in Performance Center, it's done on a web-based portal. So versus launching a controller as a desktop application in LoadRunner. In Performance Center, you have the ability to create it via the web, store it in the repository that Patrick mentioned, and then kick it off or auto-start it or schedule those tests as needed for your Performance Center. In LoadRunner, you have the capability of just creating the load test through the desktop controller application and then doing a manual, there's no scheduling capability. It's meant more for project-based teams, while Performance Center, with its sharing and web-based capabilities, meant for more of an enterprise or environment where it makes sense to share your assets.
Okay, excellent. So the next question is around mobility. So Gurmeet, I'll pass this on to you as well. Does Performance Center offer mobile testing capabilities? If so, what are those?
So Performance Center uses the same scripting mechanism as LoadRunner, which is VUGen. So the virtual user generator has its own set of mobile protocols. So specifically, we have two ways of creating mobile scripts. You have the mobile web HTTP HTML protocol, and you also have the true client protocol that is mobile specific. Within these protocols, there are many ways of capturing mobile traffic or simulating mobile actions, and these scripts, once created, can be leveraged within Performance Center as well, just like they are in LoadRunner. So the scripting solution is the same for PC and for LoadRunner.
Okay, excellent. The next question is about version 11.52, which was released yesterday. So Gurmeet, this will be yours. May I go from Performance Center 11.50 to 11.52 directly, or do I need to install 11.51 first and then move to 11.52?
You can go directly from Performance Center 11.50 to Performance Center 11.52. In case you've installed patch 1, not service pack 1, in case you install patch 1, there's a small rollback that's required. But if you're on 5.1, you can upgrade to 5.2. If you're on 5.0 vanilla, you can upgrade to 5.2.
Okay, excellent. Next question, I will take this one. Can you confirm that the June webinar is focused on deep dive on Performance Center 11.5? So I wanted to confirm, yes, it is going to be a deep dive. Gurmeet and myself will be presenting, and we'll be talking about the performance application lifecycle component of Performance Center and also the lab management. These are more advanced topics. Some of them are new features, especially performance application lifecycle, which allows you to bring data from BSM, Business Service Management, production data into Performance Center and vice versa. So you're able to share assets. And the lab management component is where you can actually deploy applications through ALM and Performance Center where you can run your test. So we'll be covering those topics. Please go on our website and register for that, and we'll be talking again, presenting this webinar on June 5th. Next question for Patrick. And I think I've got time here for a few more questions. Patrick, so can file repository SQL Server be on the same server as ALM?
So it can be, but we do not recommend that. And the reason that we don't recommend it is that if you had a catastrophic failure of that server, then you would basically lose everything because you lose your file system and your database. It also doesn't work well if you want to move to high availability. So if you wanted to have multiple ALM servers, you're still kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. So if that one ALM server goes down, then you're potentially losing everything. There are some configuration challenges that would go along with having two ALM servers point to a repository that is actually being hosted on one of the ALM servers as well. So there's some technical challenges, and as far as best practices, you want to make sure that they're separated because it provides for easier management and change control of those systems.
Okay, great. The next question is, again, a licensing question. So, Gurmeet, I'll defer to you. The question, and again, I'll kind of repeat as it's written here. It could use some clarification. The question is, we have ALM X number of user licenses. We also procured Performance Center 11.0 cycle Y number of users. When do we merge the installation of ALM user licenses? Would it become X plus Y?
So I'm not sure what the Y user licenses are. Are those the free PC lifecycle users? I don't know if you know.
Correct.
So once you port, if you have bought any additional PC lifecycle users in addition to the free ones, those will be migrated over to the ALM, but not the free ones, because the free ones were intended to allow our customers, a taste of the solution. So does it really make sense for you to use requirements and defects? And if it does, and if it really makes sense for you to now move to ALM, the free portion is taken away because now you move to an ALM installation that has its own licenses. If you bought additional licenses, those will definitely be migrated over.
Okay, excellent. So next question, Gurmeen, is does Performance Center 11.x ViewGen support 64-bit OS?
So yes, it does. So I think the question might be related to the 64-bit recording capabilities as well. So I will, let me just check really quick. So as far as I understand that is the case, but I may need to get back to you on this specific one.
Okay, excellent. Now, 64-bit is supported on the load generators. What we're talking about here is specifically more to ViewGen, which we'll check and get back to you. The next question, again, Gurmeen, for you is, do we have to upgrade scripts from 11.50 to 11.52?
Do you have to upgrade scripts? No. So 11.5 of ViewGen is actually completely rewritten from the 11 versions and previous. So for that, an upgrade was required. But scripts going from 11.5 to 11.52 are forward compatible.
Okay, excellent. Patrick, can you go back to a slide before the questions? I want to present the webinar details here. So there's a question here about, how do we get notified about the June 5th webinar? We're going to be sending a follow-up email, but in the meantime, you can also go on our website, which is on the screen right now, checkpointtech.com. And there's a link there. You can click on that link, and it will prompt you to register, where you can input your name, and we'll send you a follow-up calendar invite. Again, the webinar will be on June 5th. Now, my last question here, and I'll ask this again for Gurmeen. The question is, we have existing ALM with Quality Center, but can we install Performance Center as a standalone because ALM and QC is not upgraded regularly?
Yes, of course. So the way that would work is if you choose to upgrade your QC instance to ALM, that can be separate, and you can have a standalone instance of Performance Center. That's perfectly fine. And in fact, one of the reasons people choose not to merge the two is sometimes that the upgrade schedules don't match because ALM or the Quality Center side of the house moves a little bit slower, while Performance Center needs to move faster because it needs to keep up with the technologies or the protocol updates that we bring to the table occasionally. So absolutely, you can have an ALM instance separate, and you can have your standalone PP instance as well. And if I could just take a moment to answer that question about the 64-bit recording. So yes, we do support it. There's a little bit of you need to make sure that you're on the right operating system or the operating system that is officially supported by us. So we do support recording of 64-bit apps.
Okay, excellent. So folks, with that, I want to thank everyone for spending an hour with us. We look forward to having you again on June 5th. Again, Gurmeen and myself will be presenting on the advanced topics of Performance Center 11.5. The webinar will be held on June 5th. You will be getting an invitation from us. You can also go on our website and register. Once again, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Gurmeen. We appreciate you joining us here as a special guest. And Patrick, good job. Thanks for presenting.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.